My name is Rachel Morrison, and if you had asked me a decade ago what my life would look like at 42, I would have given you a picture-perfect answer: a warm home, a loving partner, and a sense of calm stability. And in many ways, I got just that. But what I didn't anticipate was the quiet complexity of becoming part of a family already shaped by sorrow. When I married Daniel, he came not alone, but with the memory of a love lost and an 11-year-old son, Ethan, whose world had already been shaken in ways mine had not. Daniel's wife had passed away 3 years before I entered their lives, and though the cracks didn't always show, I could feel them like fault lines beneath the surface. Ethan wasn't rude or rebellious. He was kind in the way that made you pause, reserved, polite, watchful. He seemed to measure every word he spoke, every glance he gave, as though guarding something fragile and essential inside him. I never tried to be his mother. That space wasn't mine to fill, and I respected it. What I hoped for was something quieter, but no less meaningful. To be a constant presence. Someone who would show up again and again in the everyday moments. Someone who would remember how he liked his sandwiches cut, who would drive him to soccer practice in the rain, who would know when to speak, and when silence was the better offering. Ethan called me Rachel, never stepmom or anything more familial, and that was fine with me. Names aren't always the real markers of closeness. Sometimes it's the tone in which your name is spoken, or the small glances that linger just a second. Longer than before, Daniel's work as an architect often kept him busy, sometimes away from home for stretches that left Ethan and me to navigate life together, just the two of us. In those early days, our home felt like a stage where two cautious actors rehearsed scenes of domestic life, making breakfast, doing homework, loading the dishwasher, all without ever quite slipping into full character. Still, we did it. I'd leave sticky notes with reminders on the fridge. He'd quietly refill my coffee mug without being asked. We shared space more than connection, but the seeds were planted. There were moments of closeness, but they were rare and delicate. Like the time I found a small drawing of ours tucked into the corner of his school notebook, a little sketch I'd doodled while helping him with geometry. Or the night he knocked on my bedroom door not to talk, just to leave a plate of the cookies I'd baked, saved from the batch he'd otherwise devoured. Each act small, almost invisible, and yet they built something, a slow layering of mutual regard. We had a rhythm, even if it wasn't obvious to the outside world. Morning routines where I'd pack lunch while he scrolled through his phone. Evenings where we sat on opposite ends of the couch, watching the same movie but reacting at different times. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, this life we were building. It was made up of simple acts repeated over time: folded laundry, shared dinners, the clinking of dishes in the sink. Every now and then, I'd catch a glimpse of something more: an accidental smile, a softened expression, a glance that didn't dart away as quickly as it once had. And even if Ethan never spoke the words, I began to believe that perhaps I was no longer just a guest in this family, but someone who belonged in the frame of their picture. However quietly drawn, there was something profound about being needed, without being asked for, about occupying the role of a quiet anchor in someone else's storm. I found a strange kind of strength in those unspectacular routines. I learned to listen to what wasn't said, to pay attention to the things he didn't know how to express. And slowly, I began to sense that trust was forming, not in declarations or grand gestures, but in the way he'd let me into his silence, the way he'd allow our ordinary moments to stretch just a little longer each day. Asterisk. The summer before Ethan's final year of high school arrived like any other, hot, slow, and heavy with the scent of cut grass and pavement warmed by the sun. Daniel was scheduled for a 3-week project in Seattle, and I mentally braced for the stretch of quiet days ahead. I expected what I always did when it was just Ethan and me, parallel lives under one roof, connected by meals, reminders, and small talk. But something shifted that summer, not all at once, but in quiet, deliberate ripples. It started with gestures so small, I nearly missed them. The first came when I was lifting a heavy box of winter clothes from the hallway closet, determined to reorganize, and suddenly Ethan was there, silent, his hand gripping the other side before I could protest. He didn't say much, just a soft "let me" as he effortlessly carried it to the guest room where I was sorting. I thanked him, surprised, and he simply nodded before disappearing back into his world. The next afternoon, I came down from a nap to find the kitchen spotless. Not just tidy, but deeply cleaned, the dishes washed and put away, the counters wiped down, even the stainless steel sink gleaming like new. There was no note, no mention of it later, just that quiet work done. With care, I stood there for a while, barefoot on the cool tile, letting the surprise wash over me. Teenagers weren't typically known for their attention to domestic details, least of all when it came to helping out unprompted, but there was no mistaking the intention behind it. It was a gesture that carried weight, a kind of silent offering. I didn't bring it up. I didn't want to make it awkward or scare away the moment. The following morning, as the sun poured softly over the back deck where I liked to sit and read, Ethan appeared beside me with 2 steaming mugs. One of them was mine green ceramic, chipped near the rim, filled with my usual coffee blend, just the way I liked it. He didn't say anything, just sat down in the chair beside me and stared out at the yard, his long legs stretched comfortably. In front of him, the jasmine near the fence was in full bloom, its fragrance mixing with the coffee and morning air. We sat in silence, and somehow it felt full. Not empty, not strained, just peaceful. It was the kind of silence you share with someone when words aren't needed to feel seen. I began to notice other little changes. Ethan asked if I needed anything when he was heading to the store. He started joining me for evening walks, our steps matching on the sidewalk as we strolled past neat lawns and the occasional barking dog. One day he helped me carry groceries inside, then stayed in the kitchen, slicing vegetables while I cooked. He didn't chatter, and I didn't press. We just moved in a kind of easy rhythm that felt new but comforting. Later, I caught him smiling at one of my offhand jokes during dinner, something he used to meet with nothing more than a polite smirk. And then came Friday. I had been cleaning the den most of the day, lost in a cloud of dust and memories, sorting through old books and piles of forgotten things. By the time I finished, I looked like I'd wrestled with a vacuum and lost. My t-shirt was stained, my sweatpants sagging at the knees, and my hair was a disaster, tied up in the laziest bun imaginable. I was about to collapse onto the couch when Ethan walked in holding a small paper bag. His expression was unreadable, calm but purposeful. "I got you something," he said, his voice quiet but sure. I blinked, caught entirely off guard. "For me?" He nodded, a faint blush rising up his neck as he handed it over. "You've been doing a lot lately. I figured you deserved something nice." Inside was a set of candles and bath oil cedarwood. Lavender and orange blossom, my favorite scents. I hadn't even realized I'd mentioned them, let alone that he'd been listening. The care he'd taken in choosing them floored me. I held the box in my hands, inhaling the familiar notes, while something warm and unspoken bloomed in my chest. I looked up, met his eyes, and saw something there that hadn't been before. Not duty, not politeness, but a genuine softness, a kind of recognition. It was the beginning of something wordless but undeniable, a new chapter unfolding not in declarations, but in the small and sacred language of gestures. That week became something I hadn't expected, something that seemed to hum with quiet meaning in all the spaces that used to feel like routine. After Ethan handed me that small paper bag with the scented candles, something shifted, not loudly, but in a way that settled deeply, like dust catching in sunlight. I began to see him differently, or maybe I was just seeing him more clearly. He had grown tall and sure, but it wasn't just his height or deeper voice that stood out now. It was the way he moved through the house with new intention, how he lingered a little longer at the dinner table, how he seemed to be looking for moments rather than avoiding them. We started doing things we hadn't done before, not because we planned to, but because it felt natural to say yes to time shared. One evening, I asked if he wanted to help me prep dinner, more out of habit than expectation, and he nodded without hesitation. We chopped vegetables side by side, our arms brushing now and then, laughter bubbling up when I nearly dropped the cutting board. There was something light in the air, unspoken but real. He told me about a new elective he'd chosen, robotics, and how he and a friend were building a small drone after school. His eyes lit up as he spoke, animated in a way I'd rarely seen, and I just listened, not asking questions, not interrupting, just holding space for his words. It felt like a gift to be invited into that part of his world. Later that night, we sat down to watch a movie, one of those over-the-top sci-fi thrillers with absurd plot holes and laughable CGI. We made fun of every ridiculous scene. And for the first time, we laughed together like co-conspirators instead of polite housemates. Our laughter wasn't forced or brief. It rolled out freely, bouncing off the walls and curling into the corners of the room like something sacred. After the movie, he didn't head off to his room like he usually did. Instead, he stayed talking, not about school or schedules, but about life, what he wanted to study, what scared him about moving away, even how sometimes he still missed things about when he was younger, things he didn't talk about often. I listened with my whole heart, sensing the layers of trust unfolding slowly, like petals opening. The next morning, I found the kitchen already buzzing with light. My coffee was waiting on the counter, a small note next to it in his neat handwriting. "Hope you like it. Thanks for being you." I stared at the note longer than I should have, running my fingers over the ink as though it might disappear if I didn't hold it closely enough. That paper, that message, it felt like more than a thank you. It felt like a moment where something unspoken between us had finally found its voice. We spent that day together, not because we had to, but because we both seemed to want to. We tackled the attic, a job I had been putting off for months, and as we sorted through old boxes, we stumbled on Daniel's college photos. Awkward, hilarious, charmingly embarrassing. We laughed until our stomachs hurt, passing pictures back and forth like old friends. There was no tension, no weight of roles or expectations. Just a kind of ease that had taken years to grow and had finally found space to bloom. That evening, we went to the farmer's market. I usually went alone, wandering through stalls of peaches and fresh bread, but Ethan offered to come. He carried the bags without being asked, tossing in a few extra tomatoes after I hesitated, saying, "We'll use them, don't worry." On the way home, he told me about a book he was reading, a complex sci-fi novel with time travel and ethical dilemmas. When I asked questions, he didn't roll his eyes or shrug me off. Instead, he dove deeper, explaining plot twists and character arcs, his voice steady, his enthusiasm contagious. As the sun set that night, we sat out on the back deck, the sky turning gold and violet as stars began to prick through the dusk. He sat close, our shared bowl of popcorn between us, and told me stories from school, funny ones, surprising ones, vulnerable ones. I shared my own stories too, childhood memories that had gathered dust in the back of my mind. And with every passing hour, I felt like something rare was happening. We weren't just stepmother and stepson anymore. We were two people finding their way toward each other in the simplest, most beautiful way, through honesty, presence, and the gentle unfolding of trust. When Daniel returned from Seattle, the house felt different. Not visibly, no new furniture, no paint on the walls, but there was something in the air, something softer. I told him everything the morning after he came home, our coffee cups warming our hands at the kitchen table while sunlight spilled across the counter. My words came out in a tumble. All the small moments I had collected like smooth stones, the candles, the coffee, the laughter, the shared attic cleanup. Daniel listened quietly, his face thoughtful, then smiling, then deeply moved. "He's not a boy anymore," he said, looking down into his cup, "and I think he finally sees what you've been to him all along." Something had shifted, yes, but it wasn't just in Ethan. It was in me too. I had stepped into this family years ago, thinking I only needed to be supportive from the sidelines, a steady figure who could help hold the shape of the home together. I never expected to be seen in the way I had been that week, to be remembered, thought of, cherished even in the smallest, quietest gestures. And now, it was as if something that had long been held in reserve was finally free to grow. In the days that followed, Ethan and I continued to share space with a kind of ease that felt hard-earned. We weren't reaching anymore, we were simply existing in rhythm, moving through moments that used to feel transactional and now felt meaningful. We started going to the bookstore together on Saturday mornings. At first we'd split up, browse our separate aisles, but soon he started appearing beside me, pointing out titles he thought I'd like, handing me books with a quiet, "This one has your kind of characters." We'd sit in the little cafe. Afterward, him with a chai, me with my usual espresso, talking about stories and authors and ideas like they were currency we were trading between us. Sometimes he'd come into the kitchen while I was cooking and offer to stir the sauce or slice the bread. Sometimes he'd bring me his essays to proofread, asking for feedback, but also just wanting to be understood. And sometimes, when the house was quiet and the evening was unfolding like a gentle breath, he'd join me on the porch, the way he had that first morning with the coffee. We didn't always talk. Sometimes we just watched the sky. But the silence we shared now had depth. Like a song you'd heard so many times it became part of you. When his college acceptance letter came, we opened it together. It was late at night, and Daniel was already asleep. Ethan stood at the kitchen counter, the envelope in his hand, nervous but composed. When he read the words out loud, he'd been accepted to a university across the country. He looked at me first, before anyone else. His eyes searched mine, not for permission, not for approval, but for understanding. I smiled, my chest tight with pride and ache, and said simply, "Of course." In the weeks that followed, we packed together. I helped fold clothes and label boxes. I bought him a new set of sheets, the soft cotton kind I knew he liked. I wrote a checklist and double-checked it, not because I didn't trust him to manage, but because it was one last way I could care for him before letting him go. The night before he left, he came into the kitchen holding an old photo of the three of us, a blurry shot from a camping trip years ago, our hair wild from the wind, our smiles uneven and real. "I'm taking this with me," he said, not asking, just telling. The next morning, his bags were lined up by the door. Daniel loaded them into the car while I stood back, clutching a thermos of coffee I had made for the road. Ethan hugged his dad first, long and firm, then turned to me. His arms wrapped around me tighter than I expected, strong and sure, and before pulling away, he whispered, "You've been more than a stepmom. You've been real family." I didn't trust myself to speak right away. My voice was already trembling, but I leaned in close, holding him for one moment when I probably should have, and whispered back, "You always have been, Ethan." After he left, the house felt quieter, but not empty. His presence lingered in little things, the coffee, mug he used, the worn paperback he left on the end table, the small note I found tucked into my journal that said, "Thanks for always being you." Every so often, a text would arrive. A photo of his dorm, a funny meme, or a simple miss. You. One day, he sent a picture of a book cover, its title bold and clear, "Found Family." His message read, "This reminded me of us." And something in my chest ached in the most beautiful way. It hadn't taken a dramatic event or a long speech to bring us here. Just small moments, quietly stacked, until love stood tall enough to be seen.